Have you ever found something so small that it somehow held an entire lifetime? Not a photograph. Not a gift. Just a faded handwritten letter, folded so many times the paper had become soft. The moment I unfolded it, I wasn't an old man anymore. I was 17 again. Waiting by the mailbox for someone who never knew she would become the memory I'd carry for the rest of my life. Maybe first love didn't feel stronger before the internet. Maybe. I looked inside the envelope again. Tucked carefully between the folded pages was a tiny pressed daisy. Its petals had become fragile with time. The color had almost disappeared. Yet somehow, it still carried the feeling of that moment. I smiled. Not because of the flower. Because I suddenly remembered the afternoon she picked it. We had been walking home after school. She stopped beside a field without saying a word. She bent down, picked the smallest flower she could find, twirled it between her fingers, smiled, and slipped it into her notebook. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Who could have imagined that 40 years later, a tiny flower would carry an entire season of my life? Perhaps that's what first love really does. It teaches us that ordinary moments become extraordinary only after time has passed. Back then, we didn't carry each other in our pockets. There were no text messages. No video calls. No last seen. No typing bubbles. When someone wasn't home, you simply waited. And waiting wasn't a punishment. It was part of loving someone. You imagined what they were doing. You wondered if they were thinking about you. Every letter became an event. Every phone call felt important. Every meeting mattered, because you never knew when the next one would come. Scarcity gave love weight. Today, convenience has made communication easier. But perhaps it has also made anticipation more difficult. When everything is instant, very little feels unforgettable. The letters kept coming. Sometimes twice a month. Sometimes only once. But every envelope carried more than words. It carried fingerprints. Perfume. Tiny mistakes crossed out with a pen. Sometimes she doodled little hearts in the corner. Sometimes she drew flowers. One letter contained nothing more than 3 pages describing an ordinary Saturday. She wrote about helping her mother bake bread. Watching rain fall against the kitchen window. Getting caught laughing during class. Nothing dramatic. Yet somehow, I remember those ordinary details better than many important events in my own life. Because love doesn't remember headlines. It remembers quiet afternoons. Autumn became winter. Winter became spring. Before we realized it, graduation arrived. We stood together beneath strings of lights during the school dance. Everyone talked about the future. College. Jobs. Big cities. New beginnings. But no one ever talks about the quiet endings. The ones that arrive without announcing themselves. We danced slowly. Neither of us said much. Sometimes silence speaks more honestly than words. When the music ended, she reached into her purse. I wrote you one last letter. I smiled. So did I. We laughed. Neither of us had planned that. Maybe that's why first love feels so unforgettable. Not because everything was perfect, but because so many beautiful moments happened without planning them. Life, as it always does, continued. We chose different paths. Different cities. Different dreams. Years passed. I built a career. I got married. Raised children. Laughed. Cried. Made mistakes. Celebrated birthdays. Buried people I loved. Life was full. Beautifully full. Yet every once in a while, I'd find myself wondering. I wonder how she's doing. Not because I wanted my old life back, but because some people quietly become part of who you are, even when they no longer walk beside you. Many years later, while cleaning the attic, I found the keepsake box again. The letters were still there. The ribbon was still tied exactly the way I'd left it. This time, I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I finally understood something I had spent decades trying to explain. I wasn't keeping those letters because I couldn't move on. I kept them because they reminded me of the person I once was. The 17-year-old boy who believed handwritten words could change someone's world. The young man who waited patiently because love wasn't measured by speed. The boy who discovered that giving someone your time was the greatest gift you could offer. Perhaps that is what we've really lost. Not romance. Not love. But patience. The patience to miss someone. The patience to wonder. The patience to wait. Psychologists often say our strongest memories are tied to emotion. I believe that's only half the story. Our strongest memories are tied to effort. We remember what required something from us. Waiting. Writing. Hoping. Trusting. Love before the internet asked us to give all of those things. And maybe that's why it stayed with us. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the window, I carefully placed every letter back inside the wooden box. The little flower rested gently between the pages once again. I tied the faded ribbon exactly as it had been tied decades earlier. Then I closed the lid. Not because the story was over, but because some stories never really end. They simply become part of the people we grow into. I carried the box back to the highest shelf. This time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt precious. Maybe your first love became your lifelong partner. Maybe life carried you in different directions. Maybe you haven't thought about that person in years. Or maybe you still smile whenever an old song begins to play. Whatever your story, I hope it reminds you of something important. It wasn't only the person who made those years unforgettable. It was the way we loved. Before algorithms chose what we saw. Before read receipts measured attention. Before endless scrolling stole quiet evenings. We loved with patience. We loved with presence. We loved with handwritten words that could be held long after the moment had passed. And perhaps that is why first love felt different before the internet. Not because it was more perfect, but because every letter, every goodbye, every reunion, and every heartbeat had time to matter. If this story brought back a memory you've carried for years, I'd love to hear it. Tell us in the comments. Who was your first love, and what is one small thing you still remember about them? It could be the way they laughed, the song they loved, or the letter you never forgot. Your memory might bring a smile to someone else's heart today. And if these stories help you remember the moments that shaped your life, please subscribe and join our growing community. Every week, we share heartfelt stories about Gen X memories, first love, family, nostalgia, and the quiet moments that never truly leave us. Finally, if someone came to mind while you were listening, share this video with them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is reminding someone that the most ordinary moments often become the memories we treasure forever. Until next time, hold on to the memories that made you who you are. Because even after all these years, some letters are still writing their stories inside our hearts. We simply loved in a way the world has almost forgotten. Before we begin, if stories like these remind you of your own first love, your teenage years, or the memories that still make your heart smile decades later, subscribe and join us. Here, we don't just remember the past, we rediscover why it still matters. It had been sitting on the highest shelf of the closet for nearly 40 years. Every time I cleaned the house, I saw it. Every Christmas, I moved it from one shelf to another. But I never opened it. Not because I had forgotten what was inside. Because I remembered too well. One rainy afternoon, while searching for an old flashlight during a power outage, I reached for the box without thinking. Dust covered the lid. The ribbon had faded. Even the wood smelled older. Some people say time heals everything. I don't think that's true. I think time simply teaches us how to live beside the things that never really leave. I carried the box to the dining table. The house was completely quiet. No children running through the hallway anymore. No television playing in the background. Only rain tapping softly against the window. For a long moment, I simply looked at it. Funny how an old box can make your heart beat faster than a brand new phone ever could. When I finally untied the faded ribbon, there they were. Dozens of letters. Every one carefully folded. Every envelope addressed in the same beautiful handwriting. I picked up the very first one. The paper had turned yellow. The edges were soft from being opened so many times. Across the front, my name. Written exactly the way she always wrote it. No notification has ever made my heart race the way seeing my own name on one of her envelopes did. Today, a message arrives in seconds. Back then, love traveled at the speed of hope. You didn't know when it would arrive. Only that every afternoon, you checked the mailbox anyway. I was 17 when I met her. It wasn't in a cafe. Not online. Not through an app. It happened the way so many first loves did back then. Completely by accident. She had transferred to our school just before autumn. I remember seeing her standing beside the lockers, holding far too many books. She looked nervous. I looked away before she noticed me looking. For nearly a week, we never spoke. I simply found reasons to walk past her classroom. Funny how courage worked at 17. You could climb trees, race motorcycles, jump into lakes. But saying hello to the girl you liked, that felt impossible. It finally happened after school. She dropped one of her notebooks. I picked it up. She smiled. And somehow, that tiny smile became the beginning of a story neither of us knew we were writing. We talked for only 5 minutes. Mostly about homework, teachers, the weather. Nothing important. Or so I thought. Years later, I couldn't remember every exam I ever took. I couldn't remember every job interview. But I could still remember exactly how nervous I felt holding that notebook. Psychologists often tell us that emotionally significant moments become deeply embedded in memory. Maybe that's true. But I think first love follows different rules. It doesn't remember facts. It remembers feelings. A few weeks later, I decided to write her a letter. Not because I was brave. Because writing was easier than speaking. I sat at my bedroom desk for nearly 3 hours. The first page sounded ridiculous. I threw it away. The second page was even worse. Another trip to the trash. By the fifth attempt, I finally wrote something honest. Nothing dramatic. No poetry. Just the truth. I like talking to you. I think about you more than I probably should. I hope you don't think this letter is strange. I folded the paper carefully. Placed it inside the envelope. Then spent nearly 10 minutes deciding whether to write her name in blue ink or black. Funny. When something matters, every little detail suddenly matters too. The hardest part wasn't writing the letter. It was waiting. Today, we measure waiting in minutes. Back then, we measured it in days. Sometimes weeks. Every afternoon after school, I'd pretend I wasn't excited while walking toward the mailbox. Then I'd secretly hope. Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe she hadn't written back at all. That uncertainty did something remarkable. It made every letter priceless. Psychologists call this anticipation. But anticipation wasn't something we studied. It was something we lived. Waiting made us imagine. Wonder. Dream. Long before we ever held the envelope in our hands. Maybe that's one reason first love felt different before the internet. Nothing happened instantly. Every emotion had time to grow. Time to become part of you. 5 days later. There it was. A small white envelope resting quietly among electricity bills and advertisements. My hands actually shook. I waited until I reached my room before opening it. Inside was only one page. At the top, she had written, "I've been hoping you'd write." I must have read those 5 words 100 times. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were real. No emojis. No typing bubbles. No scene notifications. Just handwriting. Every curve of every letter reminding me that somewhere she had held this very piece of paper. She had paused. Thought. Smiled. Crossed out words. Started over. A handwritten letter wasn't just communication. It was proof that someone had given you their time. And perhaps time has always been the truest language of love. But as I unfolded the second page, I discovered something she had tucked inside the envelope. Something so small that I kept it for more than 40 years. And even today, I still remember exactly how it smelled.